Okay, I think there's a lot of confusion in these comments, so let's talk. So young earth creationists often confuse language, and this happens especially when you're talking about the genre of the book of Genesis. They will use terms like literal and historical as synonyms, but the problem is that they're not. Psalm 22 is a perfect example of this. Psalm 22 is a poetic, thus non-literal, description of a historical event, namely, Christians would say, the crucifixion. We have plenty of texts in the Old and New Testaments that poetically describe historical events. So Genesis doesn't need to be literal, it can be poetry and still be describing historical events. That said though, I hold to a historical Genesis and literal days. And the reason why I can still do that and believe in evolution is because the young earth literal interpretation of scripture is not the only literal interpretation of scripture that exists. I hold to the view that Genesis 1 is describing temple inauguration. God is giving form and function to the universe as his cosmic temple, bringing chaos into order. There are poetic elements in Genesis, like Genesis 1 has mirrorisms and all that sort of stuff like that is just a part of poetic literature. But like I said, I think the days are literal, Genesis is historical, but it's just describing temple inauguration and the function of the universe rather than the material creation of the universe. And you can check out Dr. John Walton for more on that. I would also disagree with your comment in that we know that death existed before sin. Joshua John Van E wrote his doctoral dissertation on death in the garden and showing that immortality was not a part of initial creation and that God actually commanded humans to kill animals based on the Hebrew terms subdue and rule used in Genesis 1:28 through 30. If you want more on this, you can check out my 5th article on evolutionary creationism, where I track themes of death and mortality in Genesis 1 through 3. But Romans 6:23 and indeed Romans 5:12 and onward do not contradict this. The first reason is because Scripture interprets Scripture. The second is because we see death and mortality in Genesis. And the third reason is because Paul, in referencing Adam and death, is referring to Genesis 3:22, where God kicks Adam and Eve out of the garden so that they do not become immortal. That is how death spreads, inaccessible immortality. And that's what Christ brings us through his redemptive work. Physical immortality. Hope you stuck with me through the whole video. Make sure you comment down below your thoughts and follow me for more content like this. A lot more is definitely going to be coming.